Imagine opening your eyes and not recognizing where you are. Everything around you is darkness, pressing in as if space is shrinking. You try to breathe, but the air seems to have disappeared. You try to call for help, but no sound comes out of your mouth. Suddenly, strange lights flash and faces appear, some friendly, some frightening, almost unrecognizable. You reach out to them, but they disappear at your touch. And then you understand the truth. This is not a dream. This is what some people believe happens the moment you die. This is the truth described in one of the most mysterious books ever written, the Tibetan Book of the Dead. For over 1,000 years, hidden deep in the icy mountains of Tibet, monks have studied this ancient guide. But it's not just any old book, it's a map for your soul, a step-by-step instruction manual for what to do when you die. These teachings suggest that death is not the end. It's just the beginning of the most intense, mind-bending, and sometimes horrifying journey you'll ever take. You might not even realize it's happening. The Tibetan Book of the Dead, known in Tibet as Bardo Thodol, isn't like the bedtime stories we hear about angels and peaceful afterlives. No, this book goes deeper, into a world where your thoughts come to life instantly, where your own mind can become your worst enemy. It describes a place called the Bardo, an in-between realm that exists between life and death. When you die, your body stops working, but according to the Tibetan Book of the Dead, your consciousness, the part of you that thinks, dreams, and feels, keeps going. And that's when things get really weird. You enter the Bardo, a strange, shifting world where time doesn't exist, and everything you think becomes real immediately. If you think of something beautiful, like a sunny field of flowers, you'll find yourself there. But if you're scared, angry, or filled with regret, those feelings will take shape too, and they'll come after you. You don't have to be dead to be trapped in a Bardo. That's right. The book suggests that even while we're alive, we can get stuck in these mental loops, living in a kind of waking dream without realizing it. Ever felt like you were stuck in a rut, repeating the same mistakes, or feeling like you're not really living? That's the Bardo creeping in. Over the last few decades, doctors and scientists have been studying people who had near-death experiences, people who were clinically dead for a few minutes, but somehow came back to life. Their stories match the Tibetan Book of the Dead almost exactly. They talk about floating out of their bodies, moving through dark tunnels, seeing bright lights, and encountering strange beings. Some individuals recount peaceful and beautiful experiences, while others describe terrifying visions. They talk about terrifying visions, being chased by shadowy figures, feeling trapped in endless darkness, or hearing voices whispering things they couldn't understand. And it's not just a few people here and there. Thousands of people from different cultures and backgrounds around the world have reported these experiences. In the wild, rebellious 1960s, a group of scientists and artists in America stumbled upon the Tibetan Book of the Dead. They were obsessed with the idea of exploring the mind and finding out what happens after we die. But instead of waiting for death, they decided to use psychedelic drugs like LSD to try and experience the Bardo without dying. One of the most famous of these experimenters was Timothy Leary, a psychologist who believed that the Tibetan Book of the Dead wasn't just about death, it was about how to escape the prison of your own mind. Remember to join our community by subscribing to this channel. But these experiments weren't all sunshine and rainbows. Some people had terrifying trips, seeing monstrous visions, getting trapped in endless loops of fear, and feeling like they were falling through space with no end. That's because their experiences mirrored the Bardo exactly. They weren't merely tinkering, they were unlatching an ancient and dangerous entity, perhaps not intended for play. The Book of the Dead says your thoughts and emotions will follow you to death. If you spend your life filled with anger, fear, or regret, those feelings will come back to haunt you in the Bardo. But if you can learn to let go, to understand your mind and control your thoughts, you might just escape the cycle of death and rebirth altogether. The Tibetan Book of the Dead teaches one truth. In life, you shape your mind. But in death, your mind shapes you. The book explains that there are 6 bardos we all pass through. The first is the bardo of life, the state we're in right now, where we experience the world through our senses. The second is the bardo of dreams, where we enter strange, often uncontrollable worlds while we sleep. The third is the bardo of meditation, a state of deep reflection where we can glimpse the true nature of reality. The final 3 bardos are the most terrifying: the bardo of dying, the bardo after death, and the bardo of becoming, where the soul decides its next step, rebirth or liberation. According to his teachings, death offers us the opportunity to break free from the never-ending cycle of rebirth and suffering. In the moment of death, we experience something called the clear light of reality, a brilliant, blinding light that reveals the true nature of existence. If we can recognize this light, we can achieve enlightenment and escape the cycle of life and death forever. But most people, overwhelmed by fear and confusion, don't recognize the light. They turn away from it, falling back into the shadows of the bardo, trapped in their own fears and desires. What makes this even scarier is that science is starting to back this up. For years, doctors and researchers have studied people who've had near-death experiences, people who were clinically dead for a few minutes but came back to life. And their stories are eerily similar to the descriptions in the book. They talk about floating out of their bodies, moving through dark tunnels, encountering bright lights, and meeting strange beings. Some describe peaceful, almost heavenly experiences. Others, however, recount terrifying visions, such as shadows chasing them, feeling trapped in endless darkness, or hearing voices whispering things they couldn't understand. These experiences aren't just random. They match the bardos described in the book almost exactly. But the Tibetan Book of the Dead isn't just about scaring us, it's also about showing us a way out. The book teaches that by understanding our minds, we can escape the cycle of suffering. Through meditation, reflection, and spiritual practice, we can learn to see through the illusions of the bardo and recognize the true nature of reality. The key is awareness, being present in every moment, understanding that our thoughts shape our experiences, and learning to let go of fear and attachment. Let's start with something you've probably heard of: near-death experiences. These are stories from people who were declared clinically dead, no heartbeat, no brain activity, but somehow came back to life. They're almost identical to the experiences described in the Tibetan Book of the Dead. People talk about floating out of their bodies, moving through dark tunnels, encountering bright lights, and meeting strange beings. Some describe peaceful, almost heavenly experiences, while others tell of terrifying visions, being trapped in darkness, chased by shadowy figures, or hearing haunting whispers. This is where science starts to blur into something more mysterious. In recent years, researchers in fields like quantum physics and consciousness studies have begun exploring ideas that sound shockingly similar to ancient spiritual teachings. Quantum physics, for example, suggests that the universe isn't as solid as it seems. At the smallest levels, particles don't behave in predictable ways. They can be in multiple places at once, and they only settle into a definite state when observed. This idea, that reality changes based on observation, sounds a lot like what the Book of the Dead says about the bardo. Then there's the question of consciousness itself. For a long time, scientists believed that consciousness was just a product of the brain, a kind of software running on the hardware of our neurons. But now, some researchers are starting to think that consciousness might be something bigger. What if the mind isn't just inside our heads, but part of a larger, universal field? This would explain why people having near-death experiences feel like they're floating outside their bodies or connected to something greater than themselves. It also lines up with the Tibetan idea that consciousness continues after death, moving through the bardos in search of a new existence. And it's not just Tibetan Buddhism that talks about these ideas. Many other religions and spiritual traditions describe similar journeys. In Hinduism, the concept of samsara explains how souls are reborn, based on their actions and thoughts in life, much like the Tibetan idea of karma shaping your experience in the bardos. Christian mystics speak of the dark night of the soul, a period of spiritual struggle that mirrors the terrifying visions in the bardo. Even ancient Egyptian texts, like the Book of the Dead, describe a journey through the afterlife where the soul must confront its own fears and sins before reaching peace. Mind and universe research suggests reality is more complex than we thought. Energy can't be destroyed, only transformed. Consciousness, some scientists argue, might work the same way. When we die, the body might stop, but the mind, the energy of who we are, keeps going. It moves into a different state, a different dimension, much like what he describes. We might already be living in a bardo. The Tibetan Book of the Dead doesn't just describe the afterlife. It says that life itself is a kind of dream, a transition between states of being. This idea isn't just spiritual, it's backed by some of the latest theories in science. Simulation theory, for example, suggests that our entire universe might be a kind of advanced computer program, a simulation created by a higher intelligence. It sounds like science fiction, but some of the brightest minds in physics and technology take this idea seriously. The Tibetan Book of the Dead wasn't always known outside the borders of Tibet. For hundreds of years, it was a spiritual guide meant only for those practicing Tibetan Buddhism. But that all changed in the early 20th century when a British scholar named Walter Evans Wentz stumbled upon the text and decided to translate it into English. His 1927 translation brought the book to the Western world for the first time. And it wasn't long before its strange, mystical ideas started to ripple through art, music, literature, and even psychology. Are you enjoying the story? Support our channel by clicking the subscribe button. The Tibetan Book of the Dead didn't just influence Western culture, it transformed it. Its concepts of death, rebirth, and the mind's power to shape reality found fertile ground in a world grappling with questions about existence and consciousness. In the post-World War era, as people began to question traditional beliefs and explore new ways of thinking, this ancient Tibetan text offered something revolutionary. A map of the mind's journey beyond death and a way to understand life itself. Fast forward to the 1960s, and the Tibetan Book of the Dead found an unlikely home among the counterculture revolution. This was a time when young people were rejecting societal norms, experimenting with new forms of spirituality, and yes, dabbling in mind-altering substances. Enter Timothy Leary, a Harvard psychologist who became one of the most controversial figures of the decade. Leary, along with his colleagues Ralph Metzner and Richard Alpert, later known as Ram Dass, was fascinated by the book. But instead of seeing it as just a guide for the dying, they saw it as a manual for the living. Leary and his team believed that the experiences described in the book, visions, ego death, and the journey through the bardos, could be recreated using psychedelics like LSD. They published a reinterpretation of the text called The Psychedelic Experience, framing the Tibetan Book of the Dead as a tool to guide users through their trips. They aimed to assist individuals in confronting their deepest fears, dissolving their egos, and achieving spiritual transformation. But these experiments weren't without danger. Many who followed Leary's methods encountered not enlightenment but terrifying, uncontrollable visions that mirrored the bardo nightmares described in the original text. The line between spiritual awakening and psychological horror blurred, leaving some forever changed, and not always for the better. But the book's influence didn't stop with the psychedelic movement. Its eerie, otherworldly ideas seeped into literature, film, and music, shaping the creative landscape in ways most people don't even realize. Take George Saunders' novel Lincoln in the Bardo, for example. This experimental book, which won the 2017 Man Booker Prize, tells the story of Abraham Lincoln's grief over the death of his son, set in a bardo-like realm where souls linger between life and the afterlife. The novel's structure and themes are a direct nod to the book, blending historical fiction with spiritual exploration. Then there's cinema, where the book's influence is equally profound. Bruce Joel Rubin's 1990 film Jacob's Ladder is a modern interpretation of the Tibetan teachings, depicting a man's surreal and horrifying experiences as he navigates the space between life and death. The film's disorienting visuals and psychological twists echo the bardo's shifting realities, leaving audiences questioning what's real and what's illusion. Another film, Gaspar Noé's Enter the Void, 2009, takes things even further, explicitly basing its narrative on the Tibetan Book of the Dead. The movie follows a drug dealer in Tokyo who, after being killed in a police raid, floats through the afterlife, witnessing his own memories, fears, and desires unfold in a psychedelic journey that's as mesmerizing as it is unsettling. Music, too, has felt the book's eerie touch. The Beatles, known for their spiritual explorations and interest in Eastern philosophy, were influenced by the psychedelic movement that Leary helped fuel. Their album Revolver and the iconic Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band both contain themes of death, rebirth, and altered states of consciousness, ideas deeply rooted in the Tibetan Book of the Dead. Even artists like David Bowie and The Doors explored similar themes in their lyrics, blending rock and mysticism in ways that challenged listeners to think about life and death in new, unsettling ways. In today's digital age, its teachings have found new life in modern mindfulness practices and self-help culture. Concepts like being present, letting go of attachment, and facing one's fears have been stripped of their religious context and repackaged for a broader audience. You'll find echoes of the book's wisdom in everything from yoga classes to meditation apps, even if most people have no idea where these ideas originally came from. The book's influence isn't just about spirituality or art, it's about how we understand ourselves. Its teachings have crept into psychology, particularly in discussions about ego death, identity, and consciousness. Therapists and counselors use similar concepts to help people navigate life's transitions, face their fears, and confront their inner demons. The idea that we can transform ourselves by confronting our own minds isn't just a spiritual belief anymore, it's a cornerstone of modern mental health. Throughout this journey, we've peeled back the layers of this ancient text, exploring its teachings about the bardos, the strange in-between worlds that exist both after death and during life. We've seen how the book maps out the journey of consciousness through these realms, where our thoughts don't just stay inside our heads, they become the very fabric of reality. We've learned that in these bardos, your mind can either be your greatest ally or your worst enemy. But what's even more unsettling is the idea that we're not just talking about what happens after death. The Tibetan Book of the Dead suggests that we're already in a bardo right now. Life itself is a kind of dream, a transitional state where we're constantly moving from one moment to the next, shaped by our thoughts, fears, and desires. One of the most terrifying truths in the Tibetan Book of the Dead is that the mind creates reality. Think about that for a moment. Every thought you have, every fear you bury, every desire you chase, they all shape the world you experience, both in life and after death. If you live a life filled with anger, regret, or fear, those emotions don't disappear when you die. Instead, they follow you into the bardos, creating nightmarish visions and trapping you in endless cycles of suffering. The mind isn't just a source of fear, it's also the key to freedom. The Tibetan Book of the Dead teaches that by understanding and mastering our minds, we can break free from the illusions that hold us captive. Through meditation, mindfulness, and compassion, we can learn to see through the false realities we create and find a deeper truth. The book doesn't just describe a terrifying afterlife, it offers a path to enlightenment, a way to escape the cycle of rebirth and suffering altogether. Consider the countless stories of near-death experiences. People who were clinically dead but came back to life, describing visions and sensations that mirror the Bardos described in his. They talk about floating above their bodies, traveling through tunnels, encountering bright lights, and meeting mysterious beings. Some describe peaceful, transcendent experiences, while others recount terrifying visions of being trapped in darkness or chased by shadowy figures. These aren't isolated incidents. People from all walks of life, across cultures and religions, report them, suggesting a universal truth that transcends any one belief system. But it doesn't stop there. Fields like quantum physics and consciousness studies are beginning to explore ideas that sound eerily similar to what Tibetan monks have been teaching for centuries. Quantum mechanics suggests that reality isn't as solid as it seems, that particles can exist in multiple places at once, and that observation changes the nature of reality itself. This mirrors the Tibetan idea that our thoughts shape our experiences in the Bardos. Some scientists even propose that consciousness isn't just a product of the brain, but a fundamental part of the universe. If that's true, then our minds could indeed continue to exist after death, just as the Tibetan Book of the Dead suggests. If you're enjoying this journey, consider supporting this content by giving a super thanks. By contributing, you'll be helping us make more content like this. But the influence of the book doesn't stop with spirituality or science. The book's teachings profoundly reshaped culture once they reached the West. The book's concepts of death, rebirth, and the mind's power to create reality found their way into literature, film, music, and even psychology. In the 1960s, the book became a cornerstone of the counterculture movement. Psychologists like Timothy Leary saw it as more than just a guide for the dying. It was a tool for exploring consciousness. The book's eerie influence seeped into art and media, shaping creative works in ways most people don't even realize. From George Saunders' novel Lincoln in the Bardo to Bruce Joel Rubin's film Jacob's Ladder, the Tibetan Book of the Dead's teachings have inspired stories that explore the thin veil between life and death. Even bands like the Beatles and the Doors drew from its themes, weaving ideas of ego death, altered consciousness, and spiritual transformation into their music. But this isn't just a warning, it's a call to action. The book teaches that we have the power to wake up. By practicing mindfulness, compassion, and self-awareness, we can break free from the illusions that hold us captive. We can face our fears, let go of our attachments, and see reality for what it truly is, not just after we die, but right now. Thanks for watching. Join our community by subscribing to this channel until the next video.